Those of you who haven't checked out what's happening at the studio, we are alive and well and thriving online. It's been a really wonderful, crazy experience transferring everything over. But what's really wonderful is people from all over the world, all over the nation, are able to take class and connect and things like this as well. So tell people, it's been really beneficial. People are actually, there's Adam. People are actually learning. It's really, really great. Hi, Adam. I think your sound is off.
How's that? Better?
That's good.
Good. Can you see, is this okay? Do I need to close the curtains, or is this okay?
It's a little, I mean, you look great. You get a nice kind of angelic effect behind you.
How's that?
Yeah. It becomes you.
All right. Is that better?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Good.
Where are you? Are you at the studio?
No, the studio's closed up. I'm upstate a little bit in Sleepy Hollow.
Oh wow, that's not far from here. I'm up in Woodstock.
Oh, we can meet at the river.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, you're on the other side, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think we're going to start. It's 5:01.
Great.
So we have the numbers are growing as it keeps clicking. Tell me how many participants. I don't know if you can see that. So we'll just start with Adam. Got about 50 people and growing every couple seconds. Well, I'm gonna do a quick introduction. Then we can get to you. It's good to see you, and it's been a few years.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. Yeah.
Just so people know how Adam is affiliated with the studio. About 3 or 4 years ago, one of our actors was in a play, Wolf at the River.
Yeah.
Wolf in the River? At the
Wolf
River.
in the river, yeah.
At the Flea. And Olivia Jampol, I don't know if she's here today, but she set that up, and off we went. We had Adam do a 4-week workshop on his plays that he taught, and it was really, really great. And it's just, you've been so damn busy, but it's really great to have you back in this forum. So I'm going to ask you some questions in the chat. If it goes off, you don't like the question, answer a different question. It doesn't really matter where it goes. Go somewhere good. And then people, about halfway through or so, people are lobbing in questions, and we'll pick up some of those too. So the first thing I'm going to, just to get this rolling, people don't know, they know you as a playwright and perhaps as a director of films and of screenplays, writing for the screen, but you're also a producer. You write young adult novels that have been very celebrated. You write graphic novels. You're a musician. And so my question is, how does all that, what does that weave? Are those separate parts of you? Is that kind of a weave? I mean, I notice it in your writing, your musicianship, certainly.
Oh, thanks. You know, I think it was sort of by necessity as I was coming up. I was always trying to avoid day jobs, you know, because I'm terrible at waking up in the morning, and I'm terrible at like reporting to a boss. And I think, did I freeze or did you freeze?
I took myself
Okay.
out so they could watch you.
Oh, great. Yeah, so I think it was mostly by necessity, because I was trying to figure out a way to not have to have a normal job, because I was very dysfunctional at that. And I was always daydreaming, and I was thinking about stories, and I was always obsessed with characters that were in my head. And I think the music stuff, I taught myself how to play guitar in like 1992 or 93. Mm-hmm. And I was also writing novels, and I was also starting to write plays. So all of it kind of happened at the same time. And for me, writing has always been a kind of, the music of language has always been the thing that fascinates me. The writers that I'm drawn to, novelists and playwrights, are so linguistic and musical in with their prose and their dialogue. So I was really just kind of trying to vibe onto that. And I was also a huge indie rock fan. I was a huge hip hop fan. I was a huge classic rock fan. So all of that was just kind of bombarding me all at the same time when I was sort of figuring out my creative legs.
Can you name those, right? Is that in your head who those influences were, the writers?
Yeah, definitely. Like Carol Churchill is one of my big playwriting influences. John Guare, I think, has a tremendous ability with language. Michael Ondaatje, the novelist, the Canadian novelist, I think he's Sri Lankan and Canadian. John Updike. Right now, I just finished reading another Cormac McCarthy novel. He had a huge influence on me once I started writing novels. So I was always trying to get after like the rhythms of speech, the rhythms of thought, which felt to me like an internal music landscape in some ways. And I think that kind of just started to manifest. And I started to write songs, and some of that was manifesting in just longer monologues. And then I think even in my novels, I think many of my novels are in first person, which to me is just an inner musicology of thought in some ways, and how we think and how that kind of spools out, with rhythm. So it all kind of just all fed each other, and I never was able to escape any of it. The ironic part of it is, since I've gotten busier as a producer, working in television shows, and I'm not directing in theater as much as I was. I'm playing less music, and I'm playing less guitar than I used to. It's probably been 3 or 4 months since I've actually sat down and played. I play a little piano too, so I miss that stuff a lot. And I think actually, since we've been in like quarantining and whatever we're calling it right now, I've been kind of wanting to get back to it. I'm upstate in New York right now. I have a house in Woodstock, right outside Woodstock, and I have a guitar here and a little keyboard. So I find myself staring at it, going, like, feeling it staring me down, But I really love it, and I love it all kind of equally. And it's shifted and changed throughout, as I've worked a lot more and worked less. It's been more songwriting as I've worked less, and more as I've gotten hired to do more television stuff. There's more demands on my time, so I haven't been able to sit with the music stuff as much as I'd like to.
I also wanted to ask you about directing. I think it's interesting for the actors that you direct your own plays often. Do you ever direct other people's work?
Yeah, I have, and I really enjoy that because I love the dramaturgical responsibilities of a director. I love working on a new play and helping often an emerging playwright, trying to find his or her voice. One that was really memorable for me was Chris Denham, who's actually an actor, but he's also a writer. He was in Red Light Winter, which was one of my plays. Yeah. And he had written a new play that was very good called Cage Love, about this crazy, weird love triangle that had a rape in it, and it was in Chicago, and it was really dark, and there was sort of a horror aspect to it, and it felt very Hitchcockian. And so Chris and I went from working on my play, where he was in my play, to me directing one of his plays and me sort of shepherding that. And I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoy it. I've been offered to do more recently of other people's work, which I want to do more, but my television responsibilities just don't allow me to get away for a month and a half to do that. Most recently, I was going to do Jen Silverman's new play at Williamstown. I really admire her work a lot. She's a terrific writer. And then I got pulled away from that because a project that I was doing was about to shoot in Pittsburgh, which was a show I was doing for Showtime. So I'm trying to balance that. I really miss directing actors, and I really miss working with designers, and especially on a new play, whether it's mine or someone else's.
Can you describe, if you think of it this way, the type of actor that you really appreciate when you're directing them, what they bring?
Yeah, I love actors who have kind of a weird animal instinct, an animalism. I talk about that a lot with the people I work with. I also love trained actors who speak very well, who stand well, who are really dealing with the text, who respect the text, who are I love it when I'm around a table during table work in the first week, and I love it when actors don't know what they're doing yet. I love it when they're just trying to connect to thought, and they're just trying to connect to the language. One of the actors I've worked with many times in my career is Paul Sparks, who is, I think, a genius and has had a tremendous career. One of the things I always marveled about Paul was I would write a new play with him in mind. We would get into the first few weeks of rehearsal, and it was always around day 8 or 9 when he would start to actually seem like he was developing a character. And it was often right toward the end of table work when we'd start to get on our feet. And he and I have a very close relationship and a close creative collaboration, and I trusted that. And I think early in his career, a lot of directors didn't, because they were like, well, he doesn't have an idea yet. And he couldn't walk into a rehearsal or an audition with a fully formed character. So he would often get sort of called back, but he would lose roles to other people because he didn't like land on what his role was, because he had this other process. And I really respect that. I think, a lot of directors are looking for results immediately. And I'm looking for the creature to be the right creature in my play, the right creature who's the actor, who is the right animal for the play. But I trust that that person with great technique and craft will find something, maybe not on day 1 or 2 or 3, maybe it's day 8 or 9, like Paul. And I trust that, and I trust my ability to bring out a performance and to guide a performance. I think that's my favorite kind of actor, and also one who's physically really daring. And this great actor I worked with a number of times named William Apps, who comes out of ADA, the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. He's so technically skilled, and he's got this incredible animal energy, and he's fearless, and he'll do anything. I really love that, and I don't want to ever put him in danger physically. I have a lot of fighting and a lot of sex and a lot of ferocity in my plays, and I just appreciate those people who are at once really, really technically skilled and have worked on their craft, and also who are daring and who are unafraid to sort of throw themselves into it. So I guess I hope that's not too schizophrenic of an answer.
That's a great answer, and it makes me wonder, when you're writing, actors famously, when they're doing their basic training, might do an animal exercise, or a lot of actors really try to have a strong animal image. It's something that can be kind of made fun of about actors, but actually is a very useful technique. When you're writing, do you think of the character as animals? I know from Wolf in the River, certainly, in Metal Children, the pig imagery.
Yeah.
Do you think of it that way while you're writing?
I do. I mean, not necessarily like, she's a skunk and he's a
right.
But I do think like there is a kind of archetype that I was dealing with a lot early in my career, where I felt like if there was an innocent character, whether it was a child or a man or a young woman, there had to be a wolf character. I felt like oppositional forces bring out the best kind of dramatic moments for me in my work. And so I was always trying to think, what's the tenderest thing in the play and what's the scariest thing in the play? And then as I was starting to populate my plays with characters, I found that for me, I was finding the most exciting moments when I was putting those people in rooms together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a sense. We're an acting studio, but a lot of the actors write. Yeah. And I think it'd be interesting for them to hear. Well, for instance, you were at Juilliard. You were already writing when you went to Juilliard for that program that Marcia and Marcia Norman and Krista Rang run, or used to run. How did that, or did it change you or give you more things that you actually use today? And what was the first play that came out of that? Is that Nocturne? Or?
Nocturne was, I think, the first full-length play I wrote there while I was there. I started writing that in 1999. That was my first year there. I had a real chip on my shoulder when I got there. I don't know that a lot of people know this, but I didn't actually apply to that program. Someone had given a play to Marcia. I think it was this playwright named Kira Oblinski, who was an old friend of mine from the O'Neill. And I was really not sure what I was going to do with my career. I published 2 novels. A third was on the way, and I was really frustrated with theater. I had written a couple plays that seemed to be people got excited about, but no one would produce, and I put my heart and soul into it. And frankly, I was kind of in a self-pity mode. And then when Marcia called me, and offered me a spot, I was like, at first I was like, I don't think I should go. I don't think I have the right attitude right now. I feel like you should give it to somebody else who will sees it and take advantage of it. So when I started there, I was this sort of chip on my shoulder punk from the East Village who dabbled in plays and had written, I was like, I'm just going to be a novelist and work on fiction. But she and Chris were so helpful to me with regard to thinking of the audience and thinking about how you organize information for an audience so that they can be in on it. I think my first few attempts at playwriting were very, I was like asking an audience to kind of look through a peephole and to kind of catch up to me and not know the world. And I think they encouraged me to be more generous to the audience and to sort of organize the structure of a play and the story so that they were more involved initially. And I thought that was hugely helpful to me. And I'd never, ever looked back from that. I mean, it was probably the most important thing I learned. I had no formal training, so I was reading plays. And I remember I was, when I decided I wanted to try to write plays, I went to St. Mark's Bookshop when it was still on St. Mark's Place. And I would just get all the plays with the stickers on them that had won awards. And I thought that'll be my survey into how I learn how to write plays. That's frankly how I taught myself how to write fiction too, because I was a jock in college. I went to college on a basketball scholarship, and I ran track and played basketball, and I was sort of not even in a literary mindset until my last year, where I sort of, figured out I loved writing. And then I didn't have any idea I was going to write plays until I came to New York and started seeing my brother do some plays. And I thought, wow, these are much more interesting than just musicals, because that's all my brother did growing up. He did like You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown like 4 times, Oliver like 5 times. And I just thought those stories with the music, they just were so cheesy to me. And I wanted to write darker things and more complicated things. And then I finally saw him in some of those kinds of plays. And then I was like, wow, I really want to do this. And so Marcia, I think when I finally got to that point where I was actually learning something about playwriting and not just taking like an impulsive hit on it, Marcia and Chris were really, really helpful. And also the other writers in class, Jessica Goldberg and Daniel Goldfarb and Kuzi Cram, Deborah Laufer, Ron Fitzgerald. I learned a lot from them. They were far, far ahead of me in terms of their knowledge of craft. And I was just like soaking it up. And then the rest of my time at Juilliard was really connecting with actors and performers who were hungry to do new work. And then I started to kind of figure out the kind of work I wanted to do. And then that's when Nocturne happened, and about 4 other plays when I was there I wrote that eventually were done.
Marin was here last week, Marin Ireland.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful story about the early days with Nocturne and then it moving and so forth. It's really wonderful time. I'm sure it was a wonderful time for you as well.
It's amazing that we kind of came up in the same moment in the same play. She came to New York because of Nocturne. It started in Boston at ART, but we became really tight. That's right when I was at Juilliard, and it was right when I was, Nocturne had come to New York, and we had spent so many hours together. And it's just so I never would have guessed that she would have blossomed into what she became, because not because she's not talented and beautiful and talented and hardworking, but just because Nocturne was really Dallas Roberts' showcase. He was able to put, 20,000 words on stage, and she was really an image in his mind in some ways. And she was so effective at it that so many people were drawn to her work, although she was only on stage for like 5 minutes or something. I think the New York Theater Workshop and one of the casting directors there, they were drawn to her so fast. And the next thing she did was a Carol Churchill play there. And she's never looked back. So I feel like we have this kind of sibling-like, career in some ways.
That's really nice. Really nice. Do you define the differences for yourself between working in the theater, working off right now that you've had a show on Broadway, that experience, versus writing for television or film? Is it a swirl, or do you define it very categorically?
I'm learning how to define it more. It was a swirl, a bit of a swirl, and it was very enigmatic for a while. But the theater stuff for me was so structured for so many years because I was going from play to play and directing them and getting involved in understanding that rhythm where you're in a room with actors for 4 weeks, then you're in tech, and then you're opening the show, and then you're with the show for another month. That was happening 3 or 4 times a year. And that was very defining for me in terms of time, in terms of schedule, in terms of the rhythm of how I was writing and thinking. And then when I got opportunities to do television, that's a very different world because a writer's room is like a 9-to-5 job in some ways. Mm-hmm. And then if you go into production, which I've done a number of times now, you're on set from, anywhere from 6 a.m. to 5 a.m., 6 a.m. to 5 a.m. the following morning. And that's just a whole other kind of rabbit hole. So managing those different shifts in time and the way I was conducting my days and nights really changed when television hit. And in between all of that, when I would have a few months off in between projects, I was able to kind of get back to a novel that I was working on. And I was able to kind of satisfy my need to be alone during those times, because the thing that is so great about theater is that it's social and that it's familial, but that's also the thing that kind of drives you crazy too. And especially with my own work, where I would digest it and redigest it and see it come up. And it was like I was chewing my own cud for 10 weeks. It would be great to get away from that and just to go into a completely different realm alone in my office or my room and just working on a novel alone with the sound in my head. The other question you asked was the difference of Broadway. It was quite weird. I was used to mostly doing shows at places like Rattlestick and the Flea and the Vineyard and the Atlantic and the Workshop and places like that, where our biggest audience was like 200 or 250. And then suddenly I'm at, Studio 54, which is almost 1,000. That size of an audience, thinking and breathing and encountering your play is really exciting, and it's also can be damning, So there was that to get used to. And then also, I didn't direct that one. David Cromer did, and he did a beautiful job. But up front, I couldn't do it because of schedule and for other reasons too. But it was strange to have built this career for 20 years on bringing my own work to life. And then the biggest thing that happens to me is someone else at the helm. Now, I will say this, I have so much respect for David's work, and I think he's such a genius that it was a pleasure to be in the room with him and to watch him conduct rehearsals and work with Mary Louise and Will Hochman, who are terrific. So I learned a lot, and I learned about, he's so good with designers. He's so good with in tech. So there's always something to learn from every director, but it was just a little weird not being the one who brought it all the way there. It was bittersweet in some ways, but it was also less stressful in some ways because I could just kind of sit next to him and watch him stress out and not take on 2 loads of stress, if that makes sense.
It's such a beautiful play. Those of you who didn't see it, you can read it. It's just a real special play, and it's I think something different than you've written before. That was my impression. I don't know every single play you've written, but does it feel that way to you? Was that intentional, or do you agree with me?
I do, yeah. I think it came out of some seeds of other kinds of plays, like the memory play of the literary memory thing of Nocturne, and the realism that happens in the play where they're in the kitchen together. That comes out of a lot of things that I got used to writing, where there's moment to moment, real time, breath by breath kind of rhythm. But the thing I feel that I hadn't done before, which was new for me and scary, was trusting ambiguity and the mystery and not having to answer it. I think in a lot of my other plays, there's a lot of apocalypse in them, and there's a lot of apocalypse at the end, and there's a lot of sadness or brutality or joy even. But I think with this one, it was the first time I really kind of trusted, maybe not knowing all the answers and letting the audience sort of walk away with some of those mysteries and trusting that. I think that's something I hadn't done before.
Oh, by the way, if people are lobbing in some questions, you feel free to continue to do that if you want about anything.
Yeah, I don't know if am I supposed to see the questions? I can't tell if I'm looking at, am I supposed to look at questions?
I don't know I don't know if you get them too. I don't know how this works with the.
I have a Q&A thing up here. I'm not
Then
sure.
you can read them. Yeah, you can read them.
Oh, can I read one?
Yeah, well, no, we're gonna have. It's more fun if you say their name, and then Lizzie, who's moderating this, will let them in, and they can ask it live.
Oh, great. Okay, I have like 7 here. So why don't we just start with the first one? Ben Frankhauser, is that his name?
I'm gonna nix Ben only because last week he got to ask one. I want as many people. If we get to
great.
Ben, we'll do it. Yeah. Sorry, Ben.
Sarah Sabalos.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Okay. Can we work that out, Lizzie?
Hi. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Adam. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
You brought up a lot of really good stuff, and I mean, of course, I'm an actor, but I'm also working on a novel as well. And you mentioned the first-person perspective, but for me, like, I've been focused so much on acting, so for me to pick it back up again, I find myself a little lost. So I was just curious if that's happened to you, and if so, how do you get back into the writing process?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that because I'm actually working on something now that I put down for about 5 months. And it's always hard to kind of get back into it. I find that putting something down and coming back to it is the hardest thing, especially with fiction writing, because you're in this world and you're down this rabbit hole and you're connected to it, and then suddenly you're pulled out because of work, or you're pulled out because of life circumstances,
Right.
or you have to walk away from it for a few weeks. I find that actually going back to the beginning and just rereading it, re-engaging with it with no pressure, just reading it for pleasure, and reminding yourself of what those early impulses were, helps me to kind of root myself back into the character, or back into the circumstances, or back into the whole thing I was trying to get at. I did that this time. It took me like a week to actually read through everything because it's quite long at this point, but I'm glad I did. And then I was able to kind of rush back to this one section. Also, the thing I'm working on jumps around in time quite a bit. It doesn't jump around, but it like starts in 1951 and it ends 50 years later. And that was a real kind of mental jujitsu I had to figure out, because you start, when you go into that place, it's, if you're in 1964 and you're in Chicago, that there's all this research and there's all this kind of music, and you try to bathe yourself in that environment and as much as possible. So it's like getting it back into that as well, which I think is a lot like acting in some ways.
Right.
I've never formally been an actor or tried to act really, but I assume that's what it feels like. And, trying to get the smells and the feelings. I try to do that as much as possible I think that's the biggest piece of advice I can get. And to find out what you loved about it, what like haunted you about it, what bothered you about it, what hooked you to revisit those things. And sometimes that's painful, and sometimes that can be fun.
Yeah, that's where it's stuck, because it's painful to pick it back up again. Like, oh, do I want to revisit? Okay. But that's helpful. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thanks, Sarah.
Should I go to another one?
Sure.
All right. This one would be from Trevor Guyton. Is that right? Trevor Guyton, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, so I'm mostly a screenwriter, and I'm constantly struggling with like when the first 20 pages of the script, when you're first meeting the character, how to introduce the audience to the character without another character just explaining that, like about this, or even just like cutaways and flashbacks. Do you have any recommendations on like organic ways of showing the audience character traits?
It's so funny. I was just dealing with this yesterday because the thing I'm working on with Dan Futterman right now is called Rust, and Jeff Daniels is the lead actor in it, and he plays a small town police chief in southwestern Pennsylvania, who is trying to sort out the details of a murder, and I was, we were going back to the beginning of the season. We've already written the entire season, but we were going back and we realized we needed an intro moment for him. And Danny did this brilliant thing where the first time we meet him, he's in the woods and he's got his rifle trained on a deer. And we see a middle-aged man in the woods. We don't know what he's aiming at. Is he a killer? Is he a hunter? And it turns out three scenes later, we find out that he's actually the police chief. But there's something so strange and mysterious about that first image. So what I'm getting at is I'm always trying to search for the most interesting portrait, small portrait that you can create of a character, and with our first intro to him or her. You know, are they in their room? What is a secret they're keeping? What is their sort of unconscious want? Are they lonely? Are they thirsty? You know, just something that gives us a way into some intimate moment with them, I think is always a good way. And then you can sort of fill it out as you progress with scenes. That's just something I'm dealing with now, and I think it's effective. I've tried to use it in the past and it's worked, and I think it's a good way to intro characters without giving too much away, and what you were getting at before about exposition, without having a bunch of people talk about this person or have information just being doled out in a non-active way. I think it's these silent scenes where we see people, doing things that are so telling. I always try to start there.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We take Mullins. Do you mind if we take Mullins Barr's question next?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. Is it Mullen? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's Mullen. That's it.
Hi.
Hi.
I can't see anybody. I'm just hearing voices. It's like I'm on the radio.
It's great. It's super interesting. Thank you so much for being part of this, and thanks, Scott. I miss you all. I had a question just about how you develop your stories. If you think about characters first, and then kind of let the story develop, or if you have an idea for a story or something that, I don't know, that you experience yourself, or and then go more to developing the characters afterwards. Because I've just started writing the last couple of years, and I tend to find something interesting in characters and then kind of just in my own mind follow these characters around, and then it doesn't always add the right structure that I want, or I lose the thread after a little while. Just curious to hear your
I would say it always starts with character for me, and then I'm trying to find a world for that person to be tasked in. This is a kind of silly example, but it's true. When I was doing Nocturne in Boston, this is 20 years ago, Dallas Roberts and I were spending a lot of time together, and he played a lot of video games, and he watched a lot of QVC for some reason. And one time I came to his little apartment, and these two guys were selling baseball cards as if their life depended on it. And they kept trying to sell a Ken Griffey rookie card, and they were screaming at the viewer, you're not going to get a better deal. This is the best. The Blue Book value doesn't have anything close to this. And then this one guy kept saying over and over, pick up the phone and call me right now. I'm stone cold dead serious. And I could not get that slogan, stone cold dead serious, out of my mind. And at the same time, I started seeing a beached middle-aged man with a bad back watching this program that I was watching, and his family started to sort of build around that. So sometimes it's as simple as that. That's became the title of a play of mine, and then it became a title of a collection of plays. It can be as simple as that, and the character comes out of that. Sometimes, there's kids. I play basketball in New York a lot, and there's, not now, of course, and not in the parks anymore, but back in the day, I just run into the craziest characters in Tompkins Square Park, and somebody would just say something that would just stick in my head, and I would start to obsess about that phrase or that character, or this kid who's obsessed with kung fu, or a cab driver that I spoke to. A lot of it starts there, and then I if I can't shake it, I can't shake their voice or their personality or the glimpse that I had from them, then I know that they're worth my time in a weird way. And sometimes that's an invention that's combined with a phrase that I hear from somebody. Sometimes it's a character from a dream I've had that actually, combines with someone from my family. It's always a strange amalgamation of instincts. But what I do know is that I only give it service if I can't shake it, if that makes sense. And sometimes it's New York is such a great playground for that. There's so many different voices, so many different kinds of people, kids, old people. I live in the East Village. There's like old Ukrainian people who are walking around and they're 95 years old and they're limping and they're beautiful. And, there's little kids in the park who seem like they're homeless. There's actual homeless people. There are rich kids from NYU. There's just this crazy different voices and types that are bombarding us all the time in New York. So it's such a wonderful place to be inspired by these things. And if I can find the right room for them to be in, or the right set of weeks for them to toil through, then I feel like I'm onto something.
Okay, great. That's super. Yes, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I'm gonna be a little bossy here and pick the people because I know them. Steve Bono has a good question for actors as well. Can Steve pop on?
Yeah, please.
Hey, Adam, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
I was just following up about Rust and was curious. I was a little bit in on some of not the process, but had my name slid across Abby Costin's table. Was just curious about Abby and really you and what the casting practice. To me, it sounds like as somebody who's so excited about characters, watching or being a part of a casting process might be something that's really cool because it may inform other parts of your work. And I just was curious if you had any good anecdotes from being a part of a casting process, or if you find yourself still involved or anything like that.
Yeah, no, Dan, I co-show run that with Dan Futterman, and we were very involved with all the casting. I think because I've done so much of that with my plays and in the theater, it was great. Avi Kaufman is the casting director on it, in her office did a lot of the pre-screens. So Danny and I would often get, a handful of her recommendations, and maybe we wouldn't see the 50 people she saw for the role. We'd wind up seeing like 8 people. I'm kind of the mindset of I'd like to see all 50 if possible, because I feel like, as I said before, like sometimes a casting director won't see the correct animal instinct that an actor might have for a role that I might see, or that Danny might see. But she's terrific, and we have a lot of trust in her. So it was great to come in and just go to the callbacks and work with those actors in the room. With Rust, what was so special about it is that it's a world that I know. I'm from Joliet, Illinois, which is a former steel town, and this is a smaller version of that, a defunct steel town where this homicide happens, and these 2 best friends kind of go their separate ways after this homicide. And so it was great to try to find blue collar type actors who felt authentically from this world. A lot of our principals came out of all of them mostly came out of New York. A few came out of LA. What was also great was we were looking for young kids who were unknowns, which is really, really fun to do, to discover people. This girl, Julie Mayorga, who I think is based out of LA, but she's in New York now. She's playing one of the leads. And this guy, I'm just going to blank on his name. He's so terrific. And Alex Noisgarder or something like that. Nausgarden. He's done some work, but he's pretty much unknown, and he's also one of the leads. It's really, it's one of my favorite part of trying to find work for people. I think it's most exciting when you can combine first timers or people earlier in their career with people like Jeff Daniels and Maura Tierney. We have a terrific, amazing cast all the way across the board. Bill Camp's in it, Maura Tierney and Jeff Daniels. There's this guy who's in. You guys would probably recognize him. I should say he's one of the nihilists in the Coen Brothers, The Big Lebowski.
Sure.
Mark Pellegrino, he's playing a big role for us. He's done so many weird roles. He's a lot like Paul Sparks, where he plays a lot of different kind of characters. But we have him. Anyway, it was just really fun to put those kinds of people in the mix with a bunch of unknowns, and that's what we're doing. We also went to Pittsburgh and cast a lot of local people there, so we could have that sort of authentic music coming out of their voices. But I think a lot of my background with theater being comfortable in an audition process and being comfortable working with actors was helpful. And Danny Futterman is an incredible actor. Also, he doesn't act anymore, or he seldom does. But you know, he has a real appreciation for craft and how to talk to actors. And when he's on set, he's great talking to actors and communicating with directors as well. So it's been a lot of fun.
Cool. Thanks, Adam.
You're welcome.
Lindsey Sagrera.
Yes.
Yes, Lindsey. She's here. She's gone. There she is.
Hello.
Hey, Lindsey,
Hi.
how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank
Good.
you.
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Okay. So I said my question is, if you have a kryptonite that ever stifles you in your process, have you found a way around or through it? And then I said, or maybe I want help with sitting down behind a computer screen to just begin. I see pictures and stories in my head, but then I try to write and everything's blank. So maybe I wondered what your weakness is.
There's a great exercise that I recommend for this, which I've used whenever I get into that place where I've stalled, or I feel blocked, or I feel disconnected. And it's really simple. It's the first thing I ever did in writing, and I wandered into this poetry class, and this is totally true, and it works every single time for me, at least. I was trying to pick up a class, and I was trying to stay on the basketball team, so I had to pick up enough credits, and I dropped out of pre-med basically because I couldn't do organic chemistry. But anyway, I picked up this poetry class, and I walked in, and they were doing what's called an automatic writing exercise, where you just have a legal pad or whatever kind of pad, and you have a pencil and a pen, and you play music for 20 minutes, like something that doesn't have lyrics. So it's orchestral, or it's, whatever kind of noise music or whatever you like. And you basically just task yourself to not stop moving your pencil or your writing instrument for 20 minutes, whether you're writing hieroglyphics or drawing drawing a picture, or you're writing gibberish. And what that's intending to do is to sort of unlock your unconscious, because all the stuff that we're afraid of, or that scare us, or that give us joy or turn us on, all that stuff kind of exists there. And so the exercise is designed to sort of really get at that stuff. And what happens often is you'll have, a quarter page of gibberish, a quarter page of just sentences about, that could be a diary, that what happened to you last night, what happened this morning, how I feel, how I'm thinking. And then out of nowhere, the 3 sentences of something that completely, takes me by surprise will emerge. And whether it's something a character says, or it'll be an observation or a turn of phrase. And I find that if I'm really dedicated to the 20 minutes, even if it's awful, or if it's slow going, if I'm just writing slowly, the obstacle is to not allow your pencil or pen to stop moving. And you get to that end of that 20 minutes, invariably there's something in the center of it, or at the end of it, or in the beginning of it, somewhere in there embedded is a kernel of something special. That's what I do. I also think what's really important, I know it's really hard to do right now, is to get out of your head. And for me, what I do is I go play ball, I get shots up, or I'm upstate now and I have a treadmill here. So I go run on my treadmill, or I'll go run outside because it's safe here, because there's not a lot of social distancing to worry about. But doing something physical and sweating is also something that helps me. It saves me, frankly.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Good luck.
Can you ask
Thank you.
Eden's question? And I apologize, we can't see these people, Adam, because maybe we'll experiment with that, but we found that it might just be too technical, and we'd be stopping and trying to get people to push buttons, but maybe we'll try next time.
And basically one guy I saw his face. It was like a small photo of his face, but everyone else has just been a black screen.
What's mysterious what they look like?
Yeah, it's like I'm talking to a voice. It's like I'm in a cave.
Eden, can you pop on and ask your question?
Hey, Adam.
Hey, Eden.
Hey, I just was curious, who are the writers that like you're inspired by or that you would recommend like checking out, especially in like the television film world, especially during quarantine? I feel like I'm just watching a lot of stuff and I want to make sure I'm watching good stuff.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you know, there's a couple of series that I've watched, and I couldn't tell you who the exact writers are, but I can tell you the things I've watched in the last year or so, and especially during the quarantine that have really been inspiring. There's a series on Netflix. It's an international series. It's called Babylon Berlin. I don't know if it gets talked about much. I don't know if people are talking about it here in the United States. I think it's the best thing I've seen on television in a long time. I mean, it is so sophisticated. It's like the 1920s pre-Nazi party Berlin, and it's sort of the roaring jazz age, and there's like flappers, and there's a big club, and there's poor people and there's rich people, and it deals with class, and there's terrific rich characters. I would check that out. It's, you know, it's subtitled, but it's really, really good. The first there's like 2 seasons now. I was really inspired by that. I watched that twice, actually. The other thing that I got really caught up in is Fargo, the television series. It's so well made, and it's so sophisticated and so strange and funny, and there's great actors on it. Season 2 especially, I find, is like one of the most brilliant pieces of television. I think it's 10 or 12 episodes. It's on FX. The showrunner on that, I can't recall his name right now, but I just think he's putting together something pretty special. It's an anthologized series, so they stay in Fargo, South Dakota, and then they just change whatever year or decade they're in. So I think season 1 is like Billy Bob Thornton. Season 2 is, I think, the 70s, and it's I can't remember who all. It's a huge ensemble, and it's really terrific. Ted Danson's in it. There's a bunch of great, Krista Miliotti's in it. There's a bunch of great theater actors who are in it that you would recognize probably. And then season 3 is David Thewlis, and it's Ewan McGregor plays twins, and he's so great in it. And Carrie Coon, who I love, is also in it. But check that out. It's really, really well done. A lot of people avoid it because they think the Fargo, the movie, is such a, you know, iconic movie, which it is. But I think the TV series is really, really inspired. The other things that I've been watching recently, I just watched for the first time. I watched the first season of Friday Night Lights, and it just
Yeah, so good.
it is so good, and it's so so surprising. I think I resisted it when it came out, because I always resist things that are like talked about too much, and I really wasn't watching television at that time, and I wasn't working in television, so I just sort of avoided it. And I watched it last week, and I think I cried like 900 times. I just think it's so gutsy, and it's unapologetic, and it's unafraid to be emotional, and it's about, you know, high school kids in Texas and their families, and, you know, it's about the adults in this world too. I just think it's so well done, and I'm just starting season 2 now. But those are the 3 things that I think recently have really inspired me. I don't know if that's something to look for, but I couldn't tell you the specific writers of those, but those are the ones that I think are really well show run and really well curated by whoever's making them.
Awesome. All you so much. Also, I do love Friday Night Lights, so great recommendation.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I might have just exposed like a guilty pleasure, but that's all right.
It would be great if Lizzie, or if you can do this, just in the chat box, you know, listen to Adam's recommendations like Babylon Berlin and Friday Night Lights. Kind of fun for people to see that, and they can notate that. And it was also really fun is in my acting class alone, Eden, Steve Bono, who was on earlier, they've done scenes from your plays in my class. We use your,
cool.
You know, we know, I told you that.
No,
so
that's cool.
Kind of nice to come full circle. And there's 2 questions that are similar, but I'm gonna have Erica ask it, if that's all right.
Okay.
Erica Pappas.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, hey Erica, how are you?
Well, speaking of that, Scott, he just assigned me Red Light Winter, so that's what we're gonna.
That's right.
Oh, good luck with that, man.
Oh, I've been wanting to do it for years, so that's a perfect.
Well, Adam will Zoom bomb and direct it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
My question was, as an actor and a writer, a lot of the times I will start writing a script and I won't know right off the bat whether it's going to be a screenplay or a play. and then I get stuck, and then I write 20 pages, and then I hate it, and I don't ever pick it up again. So I'm wondering if you have any sort of commonalities you find in the stories that exist in your head first, to know whether that's going to end up being something that's more TV oriented or more stage play.
Yeah, I think I've always known immediately, like, and it's a strategy. Once I know the story and I know the character, I always know it's a play, or if it's a novel, or if I've never had actually the only time I've ever had it change was I wrote a play that became a graphic novel, and I actually didn't change it for the graphic novel. It was just sort of published and produced as a graphic novel, but I sent it to the publisher as a play script, and then they basically not animated it, but they drew it. The artist drew it as I wrote it, and he did a beautiful job. But I think the thing that is always the thing that's always been very telling for me is a play feels like something where I get people in a room and I keep them there as long as possible. And sometimes those rooms expand and contract, and sometimes there's 2 rooms or 3 rooms or 4 rooms. But if a play for me feels claustrophobic, it feels like I can't let people leave unless there's a very good reason. And it feels contained in that way. I think that was mostly happening for me early on, because I felt like if I could write a few characters in a room, I could get it produced more readily because it wouldn't cost so much. But I actually found later that just technique-wise, you're writing moment-to-moment octaves as opposed to cutting away. For me, playwriting is about sustaining tension. It's about sustaining a kind of energy and a spiraling of intensities. I think film writing and television writing, where you're writing shorter scenes, it's more about getting at something quickly and getting out and moving on and pivoting, and it's more plot oriented, and it's less about sustaining that like kind of guerrilla tension that excites me about theater. It's not to say that those elements can't happen for me with screenwriting as well, but I will tell you this, that anytime I've written a longer scene, this just happened with Showtime. I wrote an 8-page scene between these 2 people who fall in love, and Showtime was like, yeah, I think we should cut that down to at least 5.5 pages, because shooting that is really difficult on a crew. And it's just a technical thing, like getting an 8-page scene shot in a day is really demanding, because you're doing all this coverage and you're doing different sizes and you're doing different lenses and all that. So it's really demanding. So I found in my screenwriting that if I go beyond 3 pages, that's getting pretty risky. So I'm trying to strategize that when I know something is a screenplay. Also visually, obviously, this is an obvious thing, but you can do so much more with screenplays visually and without dialogue. You can tell so much story by just having someone in a car and watching the landscape roll by and listening to the radio and getting a close-up on their eyes and getting close to their thought that way. Whereas playwriting for me is so dialogue driven with silences, but it is reliant on dialogue in a way. Those are the 2 sort of big differences. I always know if I can't get out of the room in my head, I know I'm writing a play. The novel for me can jump around in time more. Fiction writing is much more like jazz for me. It's much more, there's fewer rules. It's much more less obedient. It's much, I'm more mature when I'm writing a novel, because I've been doing it a lot longer. So I feel much more like a mature man. Whereas when I'm writing a play, I feel like a teenager still, like I'm wrestling it down. I have like these confines, and this punk in me is like trying to burst through the walls and through the windows, and trying to keep my characters contained within that energy, if that makes sense. I don't know if that applies to anybody else, but that's just how I feel about how my work works,
Great. Yes, thank you. That's really helpful.
Okay, good. Thanks.
We're getting to 6 o'clock when we're scheduled to stop. So I wanted to say, I'm going to take another question. I think it's a really great one from Gail Payne. But I want to tell everybody now, in case we do run out of time, thank you for joining us. I hope that you...
It's my pleasure. Yeah. I wish I could come back more,
Well, I'll ask you. We'll see if you have
Yeah.
time. And I want to thank all the people watching, and do look for the recording of this, and if any questions, I'll give them to Adam. People didn't get a chance. And next week, you'll get an email about this with the recording. And Santino Fontana is our guest next week. Very different
Excellent.
kind of guest. Tony Award winning, does musical theater, Shakespeare, serious plays, comedies. He's got a lot to talk about. Has a new baby. And I mean, I've known Santino since I recruited him for his college program 20 years ago. So we have a lot to talk about. So Gail Payne has a really great presenting tape that is a nice way to choose a final question. Gail, are you there?
Yes. Hi. Thanks. It's kind of a two-parter. So.
Yeah.
Oh, two-parter. All right.
Well, yeah. So I'm sneaking an extra one in, maybe. So, in particular, in this moment, have you been in? Is there a new story that's percolating out of this moment for you, or has it changed the way you think about storytelling in the future? In a socially distant way?
You know, the weirdest thing about this whole experience, and I've been here since March 13th upstate. I live in the East Village. I snuck back to the city twice. I had to get medication for my dog because he's sick. But, you know, this last 2 months, 57 days or whatever it's been, I don't know how many days it is now, I realized that I've been kind of living this way for a long time, you know, and I think that's part of, I think playwrights and novelists and other people who isolate to work, painters, can probably attest to this. But I find it weirdly comforting right now. I mean, I'm not in the epicenter right now in New York, which I know is difficult, and I know it's harrowing. I'm surrounded by trees, and I have a lake down the road, and I find it to be getting back to my roots in a weird way. I'm not bothered by production for this television series. I'm able to read. I've read more books in the last 2 weeks than I've read last year, you know, listening to music in a way that I haven't in a long time. There's something about isolation and sanctuary that feels like I'm coming home to myself, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Now, with the circumstances of the world, I watch, you know, the news, and I sometimes kind of I feel toxic after I watch it too often. I spent hours and hours and hours and hours the last few months trying to figure out what's going on and connecting to what's going on. And it's really sad what's happening in the world. And I've thought, you know, it's like getting through this time is hard. I don't have like a distinct idea about this time, but I do feel like what we do as performers, as creators, as writers, as directors, stories at the base of it all it's made me have a real appreciation for what we do when we gather and watch a play, what we do when we go to a movie, what we do when we have dinner together. You know, like I miss all of that, and I don't want to take that for granted ever again. I think it's going to be a while before we can gather and we can see plays and collectively experience stuff. But and I'm sad about that. But it makes me feel like when it happens again, it has to be very important, you know. So in a way, it's raised the stakes for me and how I'm thinking about what the next thing I do for theater is. I did write a play just before the virus hit that I finished here upstate that I'm very excited about. That has nothing to do with the virus, nothing to do with, it's set in 1981 in my hometown. But I'm glad I wrote it. I'm glad I have one. And I'm thinking a lot about how high stakes it is to connect physically with people. You know, what a hug means now, what making love means now, what kissing, what shaking hands, what just these general things that we took for granted, like how important those things are to being human. That's on my mind a lot. And I'm sure that that'll manifest in some way, in some character somewhere down the road. But I haven't thought about like a COVID play or, you know, or I haven't really figured that out yet. I think I'm still in the midst of it. I actually, I had symptoms, and I don't know if I ever had it, or it was scary. I had breathing problems. I was, you know, I'm a guy who can run under a 7-minute mile still, and I play basketball 5 times a week when I'm able to. And I was really, really sick. I went to London for a week, the week that it broke, and I came back and I was scared, you know, and I feel like I've gotten out of that in the last 3 weeks, and I'm feeling a lot better. And I have a lot of friends who are going through the same thing, who went undiagnosed or untested. Actor friends and writer friends who, many people I know are dealing with this, and some people have lost friends. I lost a friend who I play basketball with, who was 37 years old, who was 6'2", a 230-pound monster of an athlete, and it just decimated him. He went on the ventilator and he couldn't get off. And I just feel like all of that is feeding all of us right now in some way. And I hope we all just don't take for granted what this gift we have is, to be able to make work and to tell stories together. That's just the biggest thing I'm taking away from this, and to never take it for granted again.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm so sorry for your loss. And I'm really, really glad that you're better and able to continue giving us great stories to tell.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Gail. It's a wonderful sentiment to end the program. I want to again thank Adam and thank everybody for watching. Do send this around. It might inspire others in the same way and help each other through all this. And stay strong physically, mentally, and artistically. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you, Scott. Thank you.